welcome back. Thanks to Aaron Dykes for hosting our news portion of our segment. Now, we're going to move now to our interview segment. Now, people know that we've been working for a 30-minute format, and that is indeed our goal. But Alex gave us a few more extra minutes for this interview with Mr. Wayne Madsen of WayneMadsenReport.com. And we have something very important. It's about people who are being targeted, at least so we believe, as one gentleman, as we'll see right here, Mr. Philip Marshall, an airline pilot who wrote books about 9/11 truth and was allegedly killed, or should I say allegedly murdered his family, as well as himself, in a murder-suicide plot. So we'll talk to him about that and many more things. He joins us now via video Skype. Thanks for joining us, Wayne.
Good to be with you.
Okay, now before we get into all the gory details of this particular case with Mr. Marshall, can you just explain to our audience briefly just what happened in this particular instance?
Well, on the evening of January 31st, that was a Thursday evening, many of the neighbors feel that's when Marshall and his 17-year-old son Alex and his 14-year-old daughter Michaela, along with their pet dog, a small white Shih Tzu named Suki, were shot to death, each with a single bullet. Marshall, reportedly a single bullet to the left side of his head. However, the sheriff's department did not investigate this incident until Saturday morning. So that would have been February the 1st, the day before the Super Bowl, which is very critical to this, or somewhat critical to this investigation as well. Mm-hmm. The kids didn't show up for school on Friday, so being teens, you know, their friends were Twittering them and Facebooks, and they weren't getting any response. So they were very concerned. They weren't in school. They didn't hear from 4 of them show up at the Marshall house on Saturday morning. Looking through the window by the front door, they noticed there was a body at the end of the hallway. They contacted a neighbor who went right into the house. The door was wide open, unlocked, and saw Phil Marshall laying at the end of that hallway, shot dead. The sheriff was contacted. 911 was called. The sheriff showed up, shooed all those who were not law enforcement away. They then discovered the bodies of the 2 teens on different sections of a sectional couch, a U-shaped sectional couch in the living area, and also they found the dog dead in a bedroom. So they conducted an investigation and quickly ruled the next day that it was beyond a doubt, conclusively, a murder-suicide where Marshall just flipped out, shot his kid, shot his dog, and shot himself. None of the friends of Phil Marshall, his neighbors, none of these people who knew him very well, both in the small town of Murphys, and this occurred in a subdevelopment, a gated community called Forest Meadows. All those who knew Marshall said this was not the person they knew, and they discounted this murder-suicide scenario, but the sheriff's department quickly concluded it, and then before the investigation was completed, authorized professional cleaners to come in and clean the premises.
Open and shut case, just like you said, and all the details of it, we're going to go through many of those points one by one. But before we get too deep into Marshall, let's look at some other examples of alleged murder-suicides. I believe you're familiar with this case, one of Nancy Schaefer, a CPS worker who I believe was on tap to come on the Alex Jones show years ago, and she had some hard-hitting information to deliver on that end, and she was found allegedly killed by her husband, who then killed himself. Terrence Shanky, officer during the Oklahoma City bombing, allegedly slit his wrist, walked, about a mile away from his vehicle, then shot himself. And one lady I'm sure you're familiar with, the D.C. Madam.
Yes, all those, and also Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Gary Webb, not too far away in Sacramento, was allegedly shot himself twice in his head. They ruled it a suicide, and he had been complaining about some harassment from government people before that happened. As a matter of fact, I have to say that one person who knew Marshall very well has a relative who's a head of homicide for medium-sized town in the San Francisco area. And this head of homicide said, look, it happens all the time. We deal with these murders that are made to look like suicides many, many times. So if that's the case in the San Francisco Bay Area, why does that scenario not translate over to the small Calaveras County at the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas? Why does it happen in the Bay Area, not there? Well, I have to say that the sheriff's department is not considered one of the top-notch ones. They denied, of course, they denied that there could be any outside involvement, and they also said this is a county matter. They weren't going to bring in external law enforcement. But a few days after Marshall was found, and after the yellow tape was lifted from the crime scene, and after the professional cleaners were seen there were 3 black SUVs spotted in a driveway, one with California state tags, California state government tags, and another one license undetermined by the witness that was bristling with communications antennas off the roof of the vehicle. Also, after that incident, there were 2 unmarked cars in the driveway, and about 5 or 6 investigators were going in and out of the house, the backyard, with flashlights at 9 o'clock in the evening. So clearly there was some interest in this case even after the sheriff had declared it a murder-suicide, case closed, and lifted the yellow tape, thereby contaminating a crime scene.
Exactly, and from what I understand, this particular sheriff's department specialized in meth bust, bringing down meth houses and such as that.
Yeah, the Calaveras County, like I say, it's a small county. The three major towns there are San Andreas, the county seat, Angels Camp, which was popularized by Mark Twain for the frog jumping events there, and also Murphy's, which is very close to where Marshall lived, a very small town. So the situation is those who knew Marshall best quickly discounted this suicide notion. Those who did not know him, or may have known him only through the teens that attended the high school, seemed to go along with the sheriff. The local press, I have to say, aside from the Calaveras Enterprise, a 150-year-old newspaper that actually once covered the trial of Black Bart.
Wow.
Some of these small papers are struggling to survive. They did pose some questions. They tried to look into it, but another paper, the Union Democrat from Sonora, just really went after Marshall. Called him a killer, a ticking time bomb, ready to snap. And then when his first wife, who he has had no contact with since 1988, his first wife from New Orleans, contacted this paper and just printed what I can only describe as a screed against her ex-husband, calling him violent, calling him all kinds of things. I checked this individual, and it turns out her husband is an auditor for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve for the Department of Energy, the U.S. Department of Energy in Louisiana. Obviously, when Marshall is saying that Cheney and Bush were tied up with 9/11 as a false flag attack, obviously you're not going to want to hear anything from anyone with that kind of relationship with a member of the Energy Department and somebody so close to the oil industry, because the oil industry and Mr. Bush and Mr. Cheney are indistinguishable from one another.
Exactly. And speaking of the demonization of Mr. Marshall, we have this article from the Mail Online. Former airline pilot and conspiracy theorist, I had to throw that in there, conspiracy theorist, shot dead his 2 teenage children and his dog before turning the gun on himself. And there's one thing I'd like to point out in this article, if you guys can scroll down to, I think, about the middle of the page. There's a tweet from his daughter, and she said, "Would it be wrong if I threw my cat at my dad?" And that's supposed to be some, I guess, some type of proof that he would murder his daughter because it's surprised a teenager being angry at her father. You know, you can't go out with Johnny this weekend and the kids get mad and they go on Facebook and Twitter or whatever else. But now there are some key points, many of them that you've already mentioned, but I'd like to go a little more in depth, just details of the apparent murder-suicide, I should say the alleged murder-suicide. One of them is Marshall's involvement in the government, things such as Iran-Contra. Have you found that to be a factual thing, or do you think that has any play in this?
It may well have a lot to do with his murder and those of his kids. Marshall was a contract pilot for the CIA and DEA up until about 1985, when he went to take a job with Eastern Airlines. And then when Eastern Airlines was taken over by Frank Lorenzo, you know, the union-busting business guy, Marshall said he wasn't going to cross any picket lines. He wasn't going to be a scab pilot, so he went over to United, from which he retired for medical reasons later. I know he suffered from a bad knee, was taking medication for that. But what the medical condition was, I did not know. I do not know now. But as far as the daughter saying, should I throw my cat at my dad, Marshall had an incredible sense of humor. He's about 6'2", 6'3", very easygoing. His size certainly was no indication of the fact that he was pretty mellow. He was a pretty mellow guy. On occasion, though, he wasn't paranoid or anything, but he did tell some friends, like, hey, I got to be careful of the stuff I'm writing. And I think the critical issue here is he was, after he wrote his book, The Big Bamboozle, about the 9/11 false flag, that came out around last November, and he was on the AM Coast to Coast, appeared on that show with Susan Lindauer, who also had some revelations about the whole 9/11 war with Iraq situation. Phil Marshall was writing yet another book, and he told one very good friend of his, wait till you see the stuff I'm going to have in this book, you know, this next book. So we don't know what happened to Marshall's computer. Obviously, it's looking through the window. It was ripped out of the wall. We don't know if the sheriff's department still has it, or the family of the estranged wife has it. But I did notice a very interesting thing. When I went to the front of Marshall's house, there were about 8 or 9 empty banker's boxes sitting there. Now, whether they were extras from documents already removed, I don't know, or maybe they had documents that were removed and they threw the empty boxes there. I also know that I was at the Marshall residence looking at it on February 13th. That evening, someone tried to break in through a sliding door in the back of the residence, and it's quite clear. It's quite clear that Marshall had something that somebody wanted so bad they were willing to kill him and his children and the family dog for.
Now, going point by point here, Wayne, we see that there was no suicide note.
None. No suicide note. And very interesting, although the sheriff has put out the word, no comment, and basically he's pressed many people in the county to say the same thing. And I except for one thing, I got this from this was posted on a local website out in Calaveras County, and this note states, if the press comes around asking, friends of the teens were to say, tell them that this is a result of a diagnosed mentally ill person getting their hands on a gun. So you see a lot, like after Newtown in Connecticut, you see a lot of hearts and, they're nice gestures, but clearly some people are pushing the anti-gun issue, the agenda. I have to say, Marshall told friends, I had this Glock, 9mm Glock, but a lot of good it'll do me because I don't have any ammunition for it. One thing the sheriff did state, and this was leaked, he said that he found Marshall's wedding ring on a box of 9mm ammo used for the Glock at the scene. Friends said after Marshall was separated from his wife, he never wore his wedding ring ever, and so they were very surprised to see that.
Exactly. Now, we also see the thing of a professional cleaning team brought in. Now, I'm not a CSI expert, but I think a professional cleaning team or anybody who's not, directly, relegated to the scene could potentially mess it up. And another one of my questions is, who would pay for something like that? Would his ex-wife, want to have the house cleaned for whatever reason?
Well, again, this is kind of very unusual. The estranged wife was actually in Turkey on a trip that Phil Marshall arranged because he was trying to set her up in an import business to import linens and soaps, specialty soaps and saffron from Turkey. Her background was in buying such things once for Nordstrom's department store. So, it wasn't that it was an acrimonious divorce. They were very friendly. He was trying to set her up in business so she'd have something to do. So it was the sheriff that expressed an interest in getting the professional cleaner in there. Again, it's not certain who was paying for that, although they did bring a local service in. They wanted the sheriff said first bring it in on Sunday after they wrapped up their investigation, but many of those are closed on Sunday. They found one that was willing to work on Sunday, but they didn't do a complete job, so they were back again in the next few days to finish the cleaning job.
Exactly. Now, people said he wasn't so much of a paranoid guy, but he was concerned for his safety. I'd say it's reasonable to say that you want your house being locked, you want your doors locked, your windows locked, and they found the door open at the scene, I believe.
Yes, there was a side door of the house. If you're looking at the house, it would have been on the right-hand side that was led into like a storage area and sort of a false basement storage area. And that door was never used, never opened, and that was found at the scene to be ajar. So here we have the front door wide open, unlocked, and a side door open as well. A side door that was, everyone said that door was never really used and never opened.
Now, this somewhat ties into the suicide note we mentioned earlier, or lack thereof. Is there any reason or indication why this man would not only want to kill himself, but his children?
None whatsoever. As a matter of fact, with his son, he was Little League. He was active with Little League, with the football, high school football, and with the daughter, all school-related things. He was a volunteer parent that would involve himself with these school activities. He had a bit of a sense of humor, so when the daughter said, should I throw the cat at my dad, that would have probably been, as a result of just sort of the joking that they did within that family, fairly normal stuff when you're talking a 14-year-old and a 17-year-old. Right. Obviously, it's it can get and Marshall himself was not what you would call a strict domineering dad, but he was taking care of the kids while their mother was over on this trip to Turkey.
Exactly. Now let's talk about some of the things that Marshall believed in were published in his book, such as things like the 9/11 hijackers being trained in U.S. bases. We see things like guys such as Muhammad Atta and several others. I see Saeed al-Magadi and people such as that. So people who are not familiar with this type of information, what would you tell people about these terrorists who were trained right here on U.S. soil?
Well, I think that the perspective that Phil Marshall had is that some of these hijackers, alleged hijackers, had a lot of, there was a lot of activity in the southern part of the United States. Some of the same bases that were very key in the Iran-Contra scandal, bases and airfields that Phil Marshall was definitely familiar with. So when we see linkages of Atta and his colleagues to Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, Naval Air Station Pensacola, and other airfields around that area. Obviously, Marshall had an insight there that many others probably failed to see. Also, it's unclear to me yet whether Marshall had any direct communications with former Florida Senator and Governor Bob Graham, who was the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee on 9/11, but definitely Bob Graham, who's written a novel too called Keys to the Kingdom, where a 71-year-old ex-U.S. senator is run over by a black pickup truck on his farm in Florida. When asked by a colleague of mine what he meant by that, Graham said, "That's me. That's what I think is going to happen to me." So when you have the former head of the Senate Intelligence Committee voicing fears for his safety, who says that the Saudi government, and by when you say the Saudi government, you got to include the CIA. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. The CIA station chief in the 90s, mid 90s, was this guy Brennan, John Brennan, who Obama wants to be the head of the CIA. So what does he know about 9/11? And did he order the taking out of Phil Marshall and his kids because they could pose some problem for him with his confirmation to be CIA director by the U.S. Senate?
Right. Now, with the death of Marshall, let's say he was taken out, who would benefit from his death? I know you just said the person right there and people in the CIA, but is there anybody else who would potentially benefit from his death?
John Brennan clearly would benefit by not dredging up all that stuff from the 80s and 90s, but also the Bush family. Let's face it, George P. Bush is being groomed for political office in the state of Texas. That's the son of Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush himself is being talked about as a potential presidential candidate in 2016. So herein we have the Bush family, and of course, trying to clean the slate there, possibly. And we always have to look at Cheney. I always thought Cheney had something to do with Jean Palfrey's murder because he figured very prominently in her Pamela Martin and Associates escort business when he was the head of Halliburton.
Right. Now, Wayne, in your research and investigation of this, what do you think the likelihood of a real investigation is? It's not some open and shut, sheriffs say it happened exactly like this, getting a real investigation. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm afraid because of the remoteness of Calaveras County, we've got very small towns there. I'm really concerned that what we could have here is that this case goes nowhere. I think the only way we could move this case forward is people, especially people in California, should put pressure on the Attorney General of the state of California, first of all, and Governor Brown, Governor Jerry Brown, to say, wait a minute, we're going to take over this case. Now, it doesn't mean the state's going to do any better job than the county sheriff, but they might move some reports. There's 2 reports that are outstanding. They made this conclusion before 2 very critical reports have been issued. One is the toxicology report done on the bodies. That's being done in Sacramento, and the GSR, the gunshot residue report, which is still not completed. So with 2 reports, obviously those in California are in a much better position to put pressure on Governor Brown and the Attorney General of California than anyone outside the state is, unless it would go federal. But I see no indication, or I would have no expectations that anyone could get Attorney General Eric Holder to take an independent look at this.
I doubt. He's too busy not releasing the documents for Fast and Furious. Closing remarks, Wayne Madsen.
Well, it concerns me that a person like Phil Marshall and his kids could be disappeared in plain sight. This is what happened, and there was obviously a campaign to discredit this individual by some local media, by county government, and I believe by people who interceded from the federal government and people close to the Central Intelligence Agency. If this continues to take place, we are no better than Argentina and Chile in the 1970s and 80s, when prominent journalists, authors, playwrights, people in government, jurists, lawyers, all disappeared in these countries under fascist junta control. And if that continues in this country, we are no better than those juntas in Latin America, all of which are now thriving democracies, I might add, but we're going to where those countries used to be.
Exactly. Wayne Madsen of WayneMadsenReport.com. Thanks for your time, sir.
Good to be with you.
All right, there goes Wayne Madsen. Now, regardless if you believe in Philip Marshall's take on 9/11 or not, the thing about this is it's a very suspect murder, suicide, just death in general. Why would this man who had, no violent history, according to his family and friends, just flip out one day and decide to murder not only himself but his children? It's a very chilling thing. Like I said, we talked about Terrence Yankee and the D.C. Madam and these people who were, I believe at least, targeted for their beliefs. Like Mr. Madsen said, Mr. Marshall may have had some sensitive information about those in government right now and may have been killed just for that. But on the topic of 9/11 that Mr. Marshall wrote about, if you go to the InfoWars shop, you can get it right there. You see the 9/11 documentary special, and you can see we have Truth Rising, Martial Law, Masters of Terror, and 9/11, The Road to Tyranny. Get that, check it out, give it to your family and friends. You may know about it, but don't assume that everybody does. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the InfoWars Nightly News. I'm your host, Jakari Jackson, and we'll see you next time.